If you are a freelancer and you have an LLC in the US working as a contractor for your employer, you really have to look deeply at the rules for tax residency in your country.
Anakin commented on the benefits of registering an LLC as a remote worker. He said, what if I decide to live in a particular country long term? What are my options then? What are some good strategies to address the situation?
Okay, yeah, good question. So there's a lot of nuances to this. So if you are a remote worker, oftentimes your employer would rather hire you as a contractor through a company than hire you as an employee or as an individual, because it makes it simpler for your employer from a compliance standpoint. So for example, if your employer is based in, let's say, California, for example, and you work for that company and you're an employee, but you tell them you want to go live in Mexico, it complicates them from a compliance standpoint, because once you become an employee living in another country, then there could be some issues. Maybe they need to register their company in Mexico to do business in Mexico, because now they have an employee there, and maybe you're the only employee doing that sort of thing, and so it makes it unattractive or uninteresting for them to go through that process. However, if they hire you as a freelancer or a contractor, it makes it much nicer and much easier for them, because they don't have to deal with any of the state or federal tax compliance issues. Now, if your employer is in the US, they also may not want to hire you as a freelancer, as a natural person, because independent contractor rules over the past few years have gotten pretty strict. So hiring you as an individual, but you're working for that company, they risk having you reclassified as an employee, therefore reverting back to the compliance problems you might have, especially if you're living in another country, because there's very strict rules between determining whether you are an employee or an independent contractor. And one of the determinants is, are they hiring an individual or are they hiring a company? So for example, are they hiring a company, let's say for marketing, let's say you do marketing function for this company, and if they're outsourcing to Mike Smith, for example, you're an individual, but maybe they outsource to Mike Smith LLC, and then it's more clear on the independent contractor rules that you're not an employee because they've hired a company. So having you set up as a company, like an LLC, is a lot of benefits for the employer. Now, depending on you living in different countries, your taxation in that country, it varies dramatically based on the country, whether or not you become a tax resident in that country or not, and their rules on how they treat foreign companies. So there's a lot of variables there related to CFC rules or controlled foreign corporation rules. There's a lot of variables based on whether or not you're a tax resident in that country. For example, a lot of countries have very, very different rules on tax residency. There's a common misunderstanding that if you're in a country 183 days, you are automatically a tax resident in that country, which is not correct. Some countries do have that rule. For example, Ukraine does have that rule. If you are in the country 183 days, you are a tax resident. However, in Spain, they have way more complicated tax rules. If you're in the country, one of the rules is if you're in the country 183 days, you're a tax resident. However, if you own a home in Spain, you might be a tax resident in less than 183 days. You could maybe own a home in Spain, but you only spend 3 months a year there. Well, you could be considered a tax resident for that purpose. However, Spain also has more complicated rules, like Beckham's Law, which says if you're a tax resident in another country, then you're not a tax resident in Spain as long as there's a tax treaty between the two countries. So if you are a freelancer and you have an LLC in the US working as a contractor for your employer, you really have to look deeply at the rules for for tax residency in your country. And then there's another factor is controlled foreign corporation rules that maybe they automatically tax companies that operate within their jurisdiction. So going back to Spain, for example, they do have pretty strict CFC rules. If you own more than 50% of a foreign corporation, all the profits of that company are attributed and taxable to you as long as you're a Spanish tax resident. So it gets pretty complicated. You would really need to have an in-depth consultation with our sister company, Global Wealth Protection, to determine your personal situation in that case.